So we are in the middle of a series from John 14 to 17 about Jesus teaching to his disciples in that brief period between when he entered Jerusalem and his crucifixion is coming up within hours, and it's kind of his final words. And so that's where we are in John 15. But before we turn to the Word, just a little bit from my childhood has actually helped me to process what Jesus says. When I was a kid, this was one of my heroes. Probably not many of you will recognize him. It's a British admiral, Lord Nelson. And I was, as a kid, I was disappointed that I wasn't born, 200 years ago, and that I wasn't British, because I wanted to be part of his navy. I've grown up, and so I'm okay that I was born now and not 20 years ago, because I would be dead, And I don't know if there's any Brits among us, but they're Scottish, so that's English. They're English. So I'm okay not being English at this point. I mean, that's why we fought our revolution, after all. So anyway, he's not so much a hero anymore, but I read a lot about this guy, and he was, a pretty amazing person, and he was very important for his time in his military leadership. So he was an admiral in the British Navy at the time when, of course, Napoleon was dominating most of Europe. But of course, Napoleon was unable to cross the English Channel because there's water there. And of course, Napoleon had some boats. But what Napoleon did not have is this guy. Of course, Britain had a number of rather successful admirals. But Nelson was a little bit different. And part of his difference was that his men not only feared and respected him, but they loved him. And they wanted him to come and be their leader. And part of his effectiveness is that he put together what they called even then a band of brothers. And so they were very united in mind. And one of the ways that Nelson pulled that off is like when the big fleet is sailing. Of course, they're in sailing ships, so it's not so fast. So when they're going to a battle, they might have weeks to get there. And so he would meet with his captains in his fleet. And he would communicate with them, not just orders, but he would communicate his spirit and what he wanted to accomplish. And he would give them the big picture so they felt like they were part of a band of brothers. And so they had his spirit. They understood how he wanted to fight the battle, so that when the battle started, they didn't even necessarily need orders anymore. Because they understood. They got the big picture. They had his heart. And he could have confidence that this, the captains that were under him understood his purpose, his goal. Because he was fighting his battles very different than previous admirals had done. I mean, that's why one of the reasons he was this kind of groundbreaking military leader, and he sort of changed the game at that point in time, because he wanted to annihilate the enemy, and his captains got that spirit. And so when he fought battles, they didn't just win the battles, they pretty much destroyed the enemy completely. They captured most of the ships. So that was Nelson. So he was my hero. And in his famous last battle, in which he was killed, right before the battle, as they're sailing toward the French fleet. Are there any French people here? Yeah, this is nothing against the French. This is old European history that we've all lived past. Now we have the European Union. But in any case, as they're sailing toward the French fleet, the famous signal that he put up on the flags of his ship, and that is the ship that's still in Portsmouth Harbor in Britain, was this: England expects every man to do his duty. And so that quote is often remembered from that battle. England expects every man to do his duty. And of course, as someone commented, in his fleet, it wasn't a duty to his men. They weren't doing their duty. They shared in the heart of the project. So they were wholeheartedly engaged in this battle. Well, for different reasons, this my past history of reading about Nelson has helped me to understand this passage that we're going to look at, including, the fact that our life with Jesus does include what we might call duties. There are expectations of us. If we're following Jesus, then there are expectations about those. So we're looking today at John 15, verses 1 to 17. And what Jesus is saying here is basically a repeat of everything he's just said in a slightly different form. Probably what has happened now in Jesus' teaching, he's been in his upper room. If you follow the story of Jesus in the Gospels, they were in the upper room, the Last Supper, and that kind of thing. And Jesus started his teaching there up to what we looked at last week. And at the end of that chapter, end of chapter 14, Jesus says, "Come now, let us go." And probably, literally, they all got up and they went out of the building, and they're probably walking into the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus is going to pray and be arrested. Okay? And so now, what Jesus is saying here about the true vine, probably, literally, they're seeing it. And the reason Jesus is saying this is because they're looking at it. Look at these vines. Look at this vineyard. This is what I am. But he's not saying anything new. It's really, basically, today's sermon is more or less a repeat of last week's sermon. Just now it's all going to be built around this particular image of the vine, and that we are the branches. So Jesus said, "I'm the true vine. My Father is the vine dresser. And every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. But every branch that bears fruit, he prunes it, so that it may bear more fruit. You are already clean because of the word which I have spoken to you." I mean, they've already chosen the path of Jesus. Okay, they have been cleaned in that sense. But that's not the end of the story. So Jesus says, "Abide in me, remain in me, and I in you. As a branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, so neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches." Of course, there's a difference between vine and branches. The vine is necessary, not all the branches are. The branches are connected to the vine. The branches get their life from the vine. I'm the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him, he bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away as a branch and dries up, and they simply gather them and cast them into the fire, and they are burned. Of course they do, because they're not good for anything else. That's all they're good for. A vine, you can't build furniture, from one of these branches. It's not big enough or strong enough for that. They're just good to be burned. So if you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit, and so prove yourselves to be my disciples. Just as the Father has loved me, I also have loved you. Abide in my love. And if you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love. There's that duty idea. England expects every man to do his duty. Jesus expects every follower of him to, follow him in what he does and in what he says. Just as I have kept my Father's commandments, and I abide in his love. These things I have spoken to you, so that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be made full. This is my commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. Greater love is no one than this, that one lay down his life for his friends. We'll come back to that text, but some people get troubled about that when Jesus says, no greater love than loving your friends. Okay, that's the only reason Jesus says it that way is because he's with his friends right then. Jesus loves his enemies as well, okay? He also died for his enemies. Jesus died for the world. I mean, all Jesus is saying here is that the greatest love is to give your life. That's the point. He also gives his life for his enemies, but he says friends here simply because that's who he's talking to. That's this group that right now he's talking to. So you're my friends if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you slaves. For a slave doesn't know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends. For all things that I have heard from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you would go and bear fruit, that your fruit would remain, so that whatever you ask of the Father in my name, he may give it to you. This I command you, that you love one another. So this is an image we're often using, and my point now with this image is, this is a picture of the time period Jesus is talking about. His teaching was for this time between the cross and the resurrection. Our life period now. This is for our life now. How we're supposed to live in this time while we're waiting till we either die or Jesus comes back, when everything will be made new and perfect. We're not there yet. But this is how we're supposed to live now, with our feet planted in this world, in this age. So we all have our human citizenship. That's important and real, and we have to live on this earth. And again, I want to keep emphasizing, Jesus is going to say later, I'm not taking you out of the world. Jesus does not want us out of the world. He wants us here, like we are, in these weak, sinful bodies, and surrounded by a dark world. He wants us here. He doesn't want us to escape this world. Okay? If he wanted us to take us out of the world, he would. And he will, but not now. So he's telling us how to live now in this world. Citizens of heaven, but citizens of this earth at the same time. So again, this is the time period that Jesus is talking about. I don't normally have a 3-point sermon. You know, I never try to have that pattern. I don't normally share my outline ahead of time, but for today, these are kind of the 3 basic points I want to talk about. We're going to talk about the importance of fruit in this text, and we're going to talk about the importance of abiding and what that means when Jesus said, abide in me. What does that look like? But also we're going to talk about the importance of a perspective, a particular and proper perspective. Because those first 2 can be misunderstood if we don't put them in the proper perspective. We need to have the right pair of glasses on our eyes in order to understand those first 2 points. Because those first 2 points can very easily be misunderstood and become very depressing or fill us with guilt if we don't put it in the proper perspective. So that's kind of where we're going. So you'll be glad to know we have 3 points. I have no idea how long those 3 points will take, so it still could be a long sermon. But in any case, when we get to the 3rd point, you'll know that we're toward the end, hopefully. So, the importance of fruit. And this is seen in several different ways, especially in verse 16. Jesus said, you did not choose me, but I chose you. Of course, that's good news for you. If you are here, you are a follower of Jesus. Of course, you made some choice as well. So your choice is part of the picture. But the amazing news is, before you wanted Jesus, Jesus wanted you. So you never have to be afraid if Jesus really wanted you. You didn't have to fight your way into a relationship with Jesus. He moved first. He made the first move toward you. He chose you before you chose him. But I chose you and appointed you that you would go and bear fruit. This is the point I've made often when I've talked about what does it mean to be chosen. It's very clear what Jesus says here, and even the particular Greek word that he uses. They are chosen in order to bear fruit. It's about bearing fruit that Jesus is talking about. He's not mainly talking here about their relationship with him, a vertical relationship. When Jesus talks about being chosen, they're chosen for a purpose. That's what it means to be the chosen people, to participate in Jesus' purpose. You are chosen to bear fruit. Right? But that tells us the importance of fruit. I mean, that's part of why Jesus wanted us, is because he wants us to make a difference, to bear this fruit. Okay? It's not an extra part of our salvation that Jesus chooses us for one thing, and by the way, if you don't got anything else to do, then you should also bear fruit. No, he chose us for fruit. That's how important this fruit is to him. And if you back up a little bit in verse 8, as Jesus talks about bearing fruit, this is how my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, and so prove yourselves to be my disciples. And so part of the importance of fruit in our life is that it shows we're followers of Jesus. Our lives make some kind of difference. There's something different about our lives. Our lives need to be evidence that we are followers of Jesus. As people get to know us, they ought to see something different in us that kind of puts something in their mind, a question in their mind. What's up with that person? Why is that person like he is? Hopefully it's not too weird. It might be. Okay, but it's like, that's different. I don't see many people like that. But there's something appealing about that. There's at least some difference. Okay? And so our life as followers of Jesus need to bear fruit. And that's how people know we're followers of Jesus. Listen, you know this. There's all around the world, there's millions and millions of people who claim to be followers of Jesus. And you know that there's people in the world who don't believe it. You know that. And you know that there are people who doubt the truth of Jesus because they've never seen it in the life of people who claim to be followers of him. You know it's true. If you have any conversations with people who are not followers of Jesus, you know that they know people who claim to be believers, and they see their lives and it doesn't connect. You know this is true. If we claim to be followers of Jesus, something's got to be different. Not even close to perfection. That's not what I'm talking about. Okay? If the measure is perfection, man, I need to quit my job because I'm a failure. Okay? But there ought to be something different in my life. There needs to be fruit in my life. And then at the beginning of chapter 15, again, talking about the importance of fruit. In verse 2, Jesus said, every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes it away. Okay? If fruit is so important that there's no fruit, you cut it off. I'm not good in the garden. Vasma's mother does our garden. I cut the grass. Other than that, I have, I take no credit for our garden in the back. But, Vasma's mother's always cutting things off. And it's like, that looks green. That looks okay. But it's, we've had a couple apple trees. We had to cut them down. There's no fruit. I didn't have to cut them down. Justin and Brendan had to cut them down. But, again, if there's no fruit, you get rid of it. That's how important fruit is. If it's a fruit-bearing plant or tree and there's no fruit, then you get rid of it. Then again in verse 6, if anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away as a branch and dries up. They gather them and cast them into the fire, and they are burned. And I know here I don't often kind of press that message of judgment, but in a complete biblical picture, judgment is part of that picture. If there is no fruit, absolutely. At some point, it's kind of end of story. And all I'm trying to say right now is how important fruit is. And so in this text, everything that the Father does is to ensure that there's more fruit. He prunes it. He cuts things off. And of course, if this vine, could speak and the branches could speak, it'd be like, what are you doing? Get that knife away from me. But it's for the good of the plant. The Father prunes and he cleans it so that it will be more fruitful. But a key question before we go to the next point is, what is fruit in this context? Okay, if fruit is that important, what does Jesus mean here by fruit? Some people instantly turn to, for instance, in the book of Galatians, when Paul talks about the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, long-suffering, and that's kind of an old-fashioned word, long-suffering. My childhood came to my mind there. So that can be called fruit. But in the Gospel of John, Jesus has already given us clues about what he means by fruit in this context. And we've looked at some of these. For instance, if you turn back a few chapters to John chapter 4, and this is the chapter where Jesus and the disciples are traveling through Samaria, and Jesus is sitting at the well, and the woman comes, and Jesus has this conversation, and basically Jesus evangelizes this woman and then the town. But in John chapter 4, in verse 34, the disciples come back and they're wondering, what Jesus has been up to. And Jesus says, "My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. Do you not say there are yet 4 months and then comes the harvest? Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look on the fields. They are white for harvest." And very possibly as Jesus says this, they're literally seeing people coming from the village. Because this woman has gone back to the village and she's told people in the village about this guy she's had this strange conversation with. And he's a pretty amazing guy. And so people from the village are probably now coming to the well to find out who this is. And Jesus might literally be saying, "Look, those people, this is what I'm talking about. Do you not say there are yet 4 months and then comes the harvest? Look, lift up your eyes, look on the fields, they are white for harvest. Already he who reaps is receiving wages and is gathering fruit for eternal life, that he who sows and he who reaps may rejoice together. For in this case the saying is true, one sows, another reaps. I sent you to reap for what you had not labored. Others have labored, and you have entered into their labor." My point here is Jesus talks about fruit and a harvest. He's talking about people. The fruit here is people. People coming to Jesus. That's the particular fruit that Jesus talked about in John chapter 14. And it's the same thing that Jesus was talking about in John chapter 12. In the first sermon in the series, we looked at this text. In John chapter 12, Jesus entered to Jerusalem. And it's going to be kind of this final week. And there's this scene in verse 20. Some Greeks who have come to Jerusalem for the festival, they come to Philip, one of the disciples, and say, "We want to see Jesus." And Philip finds another disciple, and so they together are going to bring these Greek people to Jesus. And in the text, Jesus never actually has a conversation with these Greek people. I assume he had a conversation, but it's not actually recorded. What happens when they bring these Greek people to Jesus is he says these kind of strange words. "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified." "Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains by itself alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit." Then a few verses later is when he's going to say, "If I'm lifted up, I will draw all men to myself." So again, here in John chapter 12, the fruit is people. Particularly it's these Greek people, but the point is that these Greek individuals who now want to know Jesus, Jesus is saying, "This is what my life is about. This is the fruit that my life is here to produce. I have come, I have been sent to die in order to draw all men to myself." So that's the fruit that we've already found out Jesus talked about in the Gospel of John. So in this context, the fruit is the advance of God's kingdom. People entering into the blessing of God's rule. Okay, that's the fruit. God's kingdom growing, which includes more and more people hearing the message and being drawn to Jesus. Now, just very quickly, just to kind of set your mind at ease, because this can be very guilt-filling kind of message, because you might think, "Oh, what does this mean? Am I supposed to be an evangelist? If this is all my life is about, do I need to quit my work and just go out on the street and just tell everyone about Jesus?" No, I'm not saying that. Okay? All of you are gifted differently. Some of you might really be that kind of flaming evangelist. I'm not. Okay, but I think the point is that all of us, and here's why we need a community. This is one of the reasons why we must be a part of a community. All of us together are part of that enterprise of people hearing the message and being attracted to Jesus. I mean, if God gives me the opportunity to tell a non-believer about Jesus, then I need to take that opportunity, and you need to take that opportunity. If God gives you an opportunity, then don't be silent. Okay? But for instance, I think my role in this project is, for instance, as pastor of this church, is to encourage you, some of you who have that gift. And I could name some of you. You're the one who's out there, you might say, on the front line, meeting non-believers every day. Okay? And what I see, and I'm very conscious of it, I'm very conscious of my part in that picture, is I need to enable you to do that. I need to make sure that you're encouraged so that you can do that. So that's where I hope that my life bears fruit. Of course, if you don't do your job, then my life doesn't bear fruit either. So look, I need you. Okay, I hope in some extent or another you need me. But that's my point. This is what God is doing, and this is the kind of fruit our life needs to produce. But again, it might look different from person to person. Okay, none of us are Billy Graham. Billy Graham did fulfill this in his particular way. It's not my calling, and I don't feel guilty about that. Okay, but this is the project, this is the fruit that God is seeking to bear at this age of the world. And that's the fruit that our lives need to be a part of producing. So that's the importance of fruit. Then hopefully, a little shorter, the importance of abiding. Again, to repeat that verse that I started the service with. I'm the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him, he bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. If we're going to bear this fruit, it's only going to be because of our connection with Jesus. Without Jesus, there's not going to be fruit. There can be lots of activity. I mean, I've spent my entire life in church activity. I mean, literally, pretty much my entire life. I've done lots of church activity. If it's a matter of accumulating hours of church activity, I've gone way past my duty, I think, Okay. But honestly, a lot of that was stuff I did, probably apart from Jesus. Okay. Hopefully, there's a lot that I did with Jesus. So I trust that God has created fruit through me. Okay, but it's Jesus who ultimately bears the fruit. I've got to do what I'm supposed to do. Okay, I'm the instrument, but Jesus is the power. So what is abiding? What does it mean to abide, at least in this text? And of course here, there's lots of things, we could look all through the Bible to give, what abiding might look like. But even in these verses, there's already some hints about, what abiding looks like, particularly what we might do to make sure that we are abiding in Jesus. But one of the interesting things is this is mutual. I mean, Jesus says, you and me, but I and you. And we looked at that last week, when Jesus said, you'll make our home in us, I and the Father, and I and the Father will make our home in you. Yeah, unbelievable that God the Father would be willing to be that intimately involved in our life. So this is mutual. Jesus, too, is active in this process, and we're active in this process. We're not alone trying to make this happen. It's not a one-sided thing. We're trying to burst through a door, break it down, and get to Jesus. No, he's constantly moving toward us as well. But part of what abiding means, that Jesus says, in my words, abiding in you. Earlier, he had said, you are clean because of the word that I've given you. There, the word that Jesus used, the word logos, and that probably refers to not just Jesus' teaching, but the entire message of Jesus' life, including his crucifixion and resurrection. You've been made clean by everything that Jesus has done for you. The message, the truth of Jesus has made you clean. Here, Jesus uses a different word, okay, and it's in the plural, and he seems to be referring to literally the words, his teaching of Jesus. It's what Jesus taught, and that's found here. Okay, I mean, he doesn't use the word Bible, but what he means is my teaching, the words, what Jesus has said, the words that came out of his mouth, those words need to abide in you. Okay? And so one of the most, basic discipline for abiding in Jesus, and honestly, any successful, whatever successful means, any successful Christian life that I know of, or Christian leader that I know of, it always includes the discipline of time in the Word. I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say always. I mean, there's probably some people in the world who literally didn't have a copy of the Bible in their hands, and I'm pretty sure that God is capable of taking care of that. But if you've got a Bible available to you, and you do, because all of you have, well, I don't have my phone in my pocket, all of you can download it. Okay, those are the words. They're in print. You can go back to them. Okay, you got to spend time in those words. It's pretty simple. That's actually not so hard to do. To spend time with the words of Jesus, to let the words of Jesus sink into you. Or the words that Paul used to clarify the words of Jesus. Let them sink, let them get at least into your mind. And through that, maybe into your heart. And then there's transformation, and life flows through us and out of us. Okay? So here's one simple way to abide in Jesus, is to regularly feed on his words. Make that a regular discipline in your life. But also, we speak to God. So twice in this text, Jesus talks about, praying to the Father. It's an interactive process. God speaks and we speak. And there's communication between us. But also, part of abiding in Jesus is abiding in these relationships of love, including with one another. And I want to say again that there might be exceptions, but they're rare exceptions. Solitary Christians do not bear fruit. Yeah, I don't think that's an exaggeration. Solitary Christians do not bear fruit. I mean, this is why disciples always gather in communities. And I'm not talking about, this isn't like, oh yeah, Mark, you're a pastor and you want everyone to come on Sunday morning. I'm not talking about that. I do, actually, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about at least a few other Christian brothers or sisters that you are with, who know you can be honest with, and they pour their life into you and you pour their life into them. And together, you are stronger. Solitary Christians do not bear fruit. Part of abiding in Jesus is abiding in his community. And I know that there's many people, and I imagine some of you have been burned out on church, and I have lots of friends, because I grew up in church, I have lots of friends who have abandoned church. And I get it. There's been a few times when I was kind of tempted, I want Jesus, I'm tired of other Christians. Okay, but Jesus is in his people. And I honestly don't think you can walk away from Jesus' people without also walking away from Jesus. At least normally. Again, there might be exceptions to that. Okay, I'm not trying to give an absolute law. But the general principle is, to survive spiritually and to bear fruit spiritually, we need to be in some community of believers. So this is why all through this text, Jesus keeps coming back, oh, by the way, love one another. By the way, love one another. That's an important part of the picture of abiding. So the importance of fruit and the importance of abiding. So we have this picture that here in this time, there is a duty that we have. There are expectations of us. There are certain things we need to do, disciplines we need to practice, because fruit is supposed to come from our lives. God is looking to make a difference in us and through us. Again, I've chosen you in order for you to bear fruit. That's what Jesus said. But the danger with that is that can become a very joyless, duty-bound kind of thing. And I grew up in churches that were all about those first 2 points. Mainly evangelism. Or read your Bible and evangelize. Read your Bible and evangelize. Read your Bible and evangelize. If you don't do that, you're a terrible sinner. And look how bad you are. I heard this message repeatedly. You only read your Bible 15 minutes every day this week. How terrible you are. You didn't tell someone about Jesus this week. I heard that message all the time. And that's the danger of just taking those 2 points by themselves. Okay? And so that's why there's also the importance of a right perspective for all of this. And why I kind of started with that example of Admiral Nelson. Because in human terms, he figured this out. He figured out how to inspire his followers so that they were filled with joy in obeying him. And filled with joy in making a difference in the world. So at the end of this section, in John chapter 15, this is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that one lay down his life for his friends. And you are my friends, Jesus says. So all of this is from the perspective of a relationship of love with Jesus, the one who gave his life for you, for us, the one who loves you that much, who loves you that much, who loved you to the very end, to the ultimate sacrifice. Our duty is to that one, to someone who loves us. One of Nelson's captains, when Nelson finally arrived at the fleet, said, "He's so good and pleasant that we will wish to do what he likes without any kind of orders." Could Jesus be that for you? Could you understand how much Jesus loves you and how amazingly good he is? And this duty that we might feel we have for him, and we do have a duty for him, it's all to our good. It's all for our good. And the duty is because he loves us. It's really a responsibility that he blesses us with. The other amazing thing is that this duty that we might feel we have, Jesus says he has it too. Just as the Father loves me and I keep his commandments. And this is what needs to change our perspective about keeping his commandments. Because you can read what Jesus says. If you love me, you're going to keep my commandments. And we might think, oh, I have to keep his commandments to earn his love. But no, Jesus is an example of what he's talking about. Did Jesus earn the Father's love? Did Jesus have to earn the Father's love? Of course not. God the Father eternally loved God the Son eternally. Jesus didn't keep his Father's commands hoping that somehow his Father would love him. That's not what Jesus is saying about his own relationship to the Father. That's not what Jesus is saying about our relation to him. We don't keep these commands hoping that then he will love us. Okay, that's not the point. So whatever our duty is, it's the same duty that Jesus had. Like I said last week, that's not so bad. That's truly not so bad. Be able to follow Jesus like that. But the really amazing thing is what Jesus says, "You are my friends. No longer do I call you slaves." And Jesus is going to explain what the difference is between a slave and a friend. "No longer do I call you slaves. A slave does not know what his master is doing." A slave just does it. A slave, the master says, go do it, and he's just supposed to do it. Or you parents, you probably experienced this some with your kids, and You might give your kids something to do, and often, why do I have to do it? And, obviously it's often wise to try to explain why, but, well, I bet all of you, at least once, you parents have said, just do it. Don't ask why. You don't have to understand why. You just got to do it. You just have to brush your teeth. Okay? Just do it. But that's the relationship between a slave and a master. It's 100% obedience. And the slave doesn't have to understand anything. Just get the orders and do it. But Jesus says, I've called you friends, for all things that I've heard from my Father I have made known to you. I've brought you into the story. I've explained why. What the whole story is about. And what is my goal? What is my motive? What is my purpose? How do I act? I've explained it to you. I brought you into the planning processes. I've engaged you in the process. I've called you friends, like Nelson did to his captains. And at the final battle, as the battle was about to start, Nelson's second in command was complaining. Why does he keep, sending orders? All of us know what to do. Okay, all of Nelson's captains knew what to do, and they didn't need any more orders. He had already explained what it was all about. And so they got into battle, they could just do it. One of the characters in the Old Testament was called the friend of God is Abraham. So twice in the Old Testament, Abraham particularly is called God's friend, and it comes up again in the book of James in the New Testament. And in a particular way, Abraham was a friend of God. One time it said of Moses, and what it said there is, God talked to Moses face to face like you would to a friend. I know I've talked about this chapter before, but Genesis chapter 18 is just one of the amazing, wild chapters in the Bible, but I think it clearly explains what it means to be the friend of God, a friend with Jesus in that task. And if you remember the story from the Old Testament, Abraham's nephew Lot had moved to Sodom and Gomorrah, which were very wicked cities, and God looked at those cities and thought, I'm going to have to judge them. God being righteous, there's this scene where, in a sense, God comes down in a physical form, probably with what we might call two angels, and they're going to check out Sodom and Gomorrah as a way of communicating. I'm not going to destroy those cities unless we know for certain that they're truly that guilty. Okay, but what happens is these three characters show up at Abraham's tent. Okay, and they're talking to Abraham. They're in the appearance of humans, but it becomes clear in their story that they are more than human, and one of them seems to represent God. And like I often say, I would love to film this scene, because if you're picturing it, it's like Abraham prepares this meal for them. He shows hospitality, and it's like they get up to walk away. And it's like you have to have this, I don't know how else to put it, and I hope this doesn't sound disrespectful, but it's like you need to have this thought bubble above God's head, because we're kind of given God's thoughts, and what God is thinking is basically, wait a second, I have chosen Abraham as a partner in what I am doing. He's my friend. I need to share with him. And so the picture is literally, this person is starting to walk away and turns around and comes back to Abraham and tells Abraham, look, this is why we're here. We're checking out these cities. And Abraham has this amazing dialogue with God. An amazing prayer, a bold prayer that, Jerry's a bold prayer. That's why I share a prayer request with Jerry, because he prays with faith. I'm sometimes scared to pray that way. But Abraham is in that model. And he's challenging, it looks like he's challenging God. Wait a second. Can you really destroy those cities? What if there are 50 righteous people? Can you destroy those cities if they're righteous people? And God says, okay, no, if there's 50 people, righteous people I won't destroy. And Abraham doesn't stop there. What if there's 40? And he keeps getting the number down. This is Abraham talking to God. Asking God, are you going to be righteous? Are you going to be the God that I think you are? Was God offended by that prayer? I think rather obviously not. I personally think that if I were going to put a thought bubble in God's, above God's mind, I would have God thinking, finally, one of my followers truly understands me and who I am and what I'm doing and how much I want them to partner with me in this is why I've chosen Abraham. This is why he's my friend. And this is what Jesus is doing to us. He's sharing with us his task, his mission. We get to share in it. It's Jesus' mission. I mean, honestly, can you think of a single other person's mission you would rather share in? Literally, I can't think of another name, where it's like, I would kind of like to share. I can't think of a single world leader where I think, I want to share in his mission. I can't think of anyone like that. I can't think of anyone. Well, wow, if I could just share in that task. Jesus calls his friends to share in his task, and he shares what he's doing. He shares his heart. He's a friend. So we're not alone. We're side by side with him. He's in us, and we're in him. This is a whole different perspective. Yeah, we're supposed to bear fruit. We're supposed to do something. But it's a privilege. It's a gift. It's a joy. This is his gift to us. This mission is his gift, and his friendship is a gift. It's how much he cares for us and loves us. The sad news is if he did bring us in to that. So the question about all of this is will that be enough for us? Is the friendship of Jesus enough? Is Christ enough? Can we make ourselves believe that Christ is enough for us? And so Megan's going to come and we're going to sing that song again because I want to burn it in our minds that Christ is enough for us.